world, maybe. Oops, let me get this on the recording. I'll start over. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds of July. And we have a very special guest today, Don Bennett, who's going to enlighten us on the power of the raw plant-based diet. And I have a lot of questions. I'm sure lots of you guys have a lot of questions. He's the author of 3 books: How to Have the Best Odds of Avoiding Degenerative Disease, the Operation and Maintenance Manual for Human Beings. He's authored The Raw Food Diet and Other Healthy Habits, Your Questions Answered, and What You Know That Isn't So, a reality-based guide to the less than accurate information in the health improvement community. Our speaker today is a passionate educator, health educator, and one of the most unique and insightful guys you'll ever meet. A vegan for over half a century and a successful all-raw fruitarian for more than 27 years. When it comes to reality-based health creation information, Don Bennett is someone you can count on for enlightening and empowering insights. Don is a disease avoidance specialist and teaches and counsels people on how to have the best odds of avoiding degenerative disease and creating robust health in today's world. We are happy to have Don with us today as one of the multi-decade-long educators and advocates for the raw vegan diet. Don, welcome. And, this is quite an impressive resume, and I'm really anxious to hear your comments. We use a raw plant-based diet for all of our patients. In fact, we published in the medical journal we called it a defined plant-based diet, but they were on a raw diet for 28 days. And whenever my patients are the sickest, we put them on a raw plant-based diet. So I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say about the raw plant-based diet. You have lots of experience with it, and our audience is eager to hear your comments. So without further ado, why don't you take the stage and the microphone, and it's all yours. And just as a word of commentary, Don's going to speak for about 25 minutes, and we'll open the floor for questions, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Montgomery. Okay, hi everybody. By way of introduction, I have been researching health issues for about 49 years. I've been vegan for about 48, teaching about health for 27 years. I've been eating a raw vegan diet for a little over 22 years and counseling for about 20 years. Now, today's presentation, I entitled it "Information You're only going to hear here." And the reason why I call it that is I'm a raw vegan educator, and I listen to all the other raw vegan educators, and I'm not hearing some things taught by other educators that I'm teaching, and I'm wondering why that is. I mean, I didn't really learn from anybody. I figured out the raw food diet for myself. I figured out the healthiest way to live for myself, because when I started learning about this, there wasn't any internet. Libraries were of no help. I kind of had to use common sense and logic to figure out things like, wait a minute, should we be putting fire to our food? I don't think that was our original diet. I doubt it. Can't see how it would have been. So we shouldn't be doing that, and we should be eating things that we could just eat naturally without having to do a lot of stuff to it, and it should be delicious as is. So I just started figuring things out for myself and came to certain conclusions and just was doing it for myself. But when I started getting a lot healthier, I started sharing it with other people. And then over the decades, the things that I've been teaching that I've kind of figured out for myself, I'm wishing other people, I was hoping other people would be teaching similar things. I've tried to peer-to-peer with other raw vegan educators, and it's funny how some of them just kind of don't want to. They're kind of like islands unto themselves, and they just want to do their thing, and it's okay if I do my thing. But look, medical doctors peer-to-peer with each other, so why wouldn't raw vegan educators peer-to-peer with each other? All right, so let's get going. So I've been researching health issues for almost half a century. Boy, I never thought I'd get to the point where I could say, wow, half a century, yay. Well, I'm still here, above room temperature and able to fog a mirror, so I guess that's good. But the important thing is I've been researching, not studying. And that's what's important. Now, yeah, there were people like T.C. Fry and Herbert Shelton, but I didn't know of those people when I first started trying to figure things out. So one day someone said to me, "Oh, you're a natural hygienist," and I didn't know what that was. I thought that was maybe a dental hygienist who just didn't use soap. I didn't know what that was. But I had basically figured out the tenets of natural hygiene for myself without realizing what I was doing. And then I found the Natural Hygiene Society. I joined that, and I was just in tears that there were other people who also figured it out, because I thought I was going to be one of maybe a dozen people on the planet eating this way and living this way. I mean, who'd be nutty enough to eat and live this way? That's what I thought way back almost half a century ago. All right, so studying is not good. Researching is good. And when you research, it's good to use the ethos of science. Now, and by the way, on my website, health101.org/science is where you can read about the ethos of science. And here's the tenets of the ethos of science. And I'm sure Dr. Montgomery agrees with me on these. Open questioning, no authorities, no biases or personal preferences, either your own or anyone else's for that matter, an honest desire for the facts, transparency, reliance on the evidence, a respect for rational and honest discussion, and a desire to peer-to-peer, the ability to change your positions when the evidence merits it, and intolerance of distortion and misrepresentation, and I'm a big one for this one, a skeptical interrogation of accepted notions. That's also very important. But I think the most important one is, first, do no harm. Right? Medical doctors take that oath. I think anyone who teaches anything about health should abide by that oath. Now, have you heard from any raw vegan educators things like the concept of supply and demand as it relates to nutrition? I speak about this all the time. It was natural for me to think about it in this respect, but I don't really hear a lot of other people talking about it. And what about, there are two categories of nutrients, and I'll expand on all these in a moment. What about diet and nutrition are two distinct categories? A lot of times the educators will just put those two together, lump them in one category. Here's the diet you eat, and if you eat this diet, you'll get all the nutrition you need. It was true a very long time ago. It's not really true today. How about, have you heard how it's possible to get less nutrients on a raw vegan diet? And people are like, what? How is that possible? I'll tell you why in a moment. How many of you heard that sunshine makes more nutrients in the skin than just vitamin D? A lot of people, I ask people in the talks I give, but to show of hands, how many people know that sunshine makes more than vitamin D in the skin? I don't see any hands going up. And I'm like, wow, we really need to know about this, because if you're low in D, you're low in the other ones too. But if you only work on D, you're leaving the other ones behind. How many of you have heard that there are many different raw vegan diets? I count about 7 different raw vegan diets. And how about, have you heard eating fruit doesn't automatically mean that the fruits that we eat will provide enough of all the nutrients that we require? How many of you ever get asked, how healthy do you want to be? When someone comes to counsel with me and they want to improve their health, I say, well, the first question shouldn't be what diet should you eat, or how you should do this or that, or how much sleep do you need. First, how healthy do you want to be? Put it on a scale of 1 to 10, and if you want a 10, there's things you do. If you don't want to do all those things, well, maybe you'd be okay with an 8. And if you pick a number of 8, okay, but the lower the number, the greater the odds of getting a diagnosis of something serious. How many of you have heard this? Just do whatever works for you. Well, I'm going to explain to you in a moment why that's not a great idea. I've already mentioned to learn as a researcher and not as a student. This is a great piece of great recommendation that people should give. Taking a first things first approach. When people, they say, well, I've got this set of symptoms or I got that set of symptoms, what should I do? First things first. And a lot of times that really just relates to any kind of symptoms you get. So there's a first things first approach you should be doing. How about, we're not designed to eat everything in a market's produce section. You go into a large market and you see the produce section there. we assume as raw vegans, let's say, that we can, that's all our food, but it isn't. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. What about the difference between nature growing our food for us and us growing our food for us? It happens to be a big difference in the nutritional quality of those two groups of foods. Okay, supply and demand. Let's talk about this for a second. When we talk about nutrition, when it is talked about, I should say, it's often talked about in the terms of supply. How much does X amount of romaine lettuce give you of calcium, etc.? How much of this gives you that? But we very rarely hear anyone, when they're talking about nutrition, talk about the demand side of the equation. Because someone's demand for calcium, or pick any nutrient, doesn't matter, someone's demand for it can be a lot different than somebody else's demand for that nutrient. So that's got to be taken into consideration. And one of the reasons sometimes for a very high demand is the person has an existing deficiency. So some people have deficiencies of some nutrients and some people don't. So demand should always be part of the discussion when talking about nutrients. Now, how about the two categories of nutrients? And people try and guess what they could be. Well, it's the critically important nutrients and the important nutrients. Okay, so the nutrients we're talking about here are the essential nutrients, the nutrients that you have to get from food. You have to get it from the outside, either from food or the sun or from something. Your body can't make it. So that's the nutrients I'm talking about here. So there's critically important and important. What are some of the examples of critically important nutrients? Well, how about oxygen, water, sodium? These are a few. These are like the biggies. You can't live for very long without enough of these. But how about in the important category? Well, my favorite to talk about is iodine. Iodine is also an essential nutrient. You need it, but you can go for decades, even years, without any. And that whole time, your health is going downhill and downhill and downhill very slowly. So when you don't get enough of the critically important nutrients, your health goes downhill very quickly. When you don't get enough of the important nutrients, your health goes downhill very slowly, which makes it more difficult to figure out, well, am I getting enough of this or am I getting enough of that? You kind of know if you're not getting enough oxygen. It lets you know pretty quickly. Your body lets you know pretty quickly if you're not getting enough oxygen. And water, you'll start to get a very deep thirst after a while. But iodine and vitamin D and some other nutrients, it can take a very long time before you start going downhill and realize there's something going on there. If you go to health101.org, I don't know if you can see the whole, is that link appearing?
Yes, we can see it at the bottom.
The whole link. Okay, it's getting cut off on my screen for some reason.
health101.org/blog.htm
#2. Yes.
#2, yes. Okay.
Yeah. If you go there, and by the way, you don't have to copy this down. All these links will be available. I put them all on one page for this podcast.
Oh, great.
Now, diet and nutrition are two distinct categories. They weren't 50,000 years ago. Way back then, we ate from the wild. As long as you were getting enough to eat and didn't get eaten, you were going to get enough nutrients. Today, they need to be two distinct categories. So if someone's talking about diet and they're not talking about nutrition as a separate and distinct category, they're missing the boat on that one, to be honest. How about how it's possible to get less nutrients on a raw vegan diet? How can that be possible? People are like, I don't know about that one, Don Bennett. Well, this has to do with the fortification program. So a lot of the foods that people eating the typical Western diet are eating, it's not a healthy diet, but a lot of those foods are fortified, like with D or B12, right? So you're getting them. And so when a lot of people I've counseled, when they switch from a typical Western diet to a raw vegan diet, they're not taught by certain educators that you've got to be careful about B12 and D because you're no longer getting it fortified in the unhealthy diet you used to be eating. So now you got to pay attention to doing certain things like getting strong enough sunshine all year round. And if you can't, get a phototherapy device for those months that the sun isn't strong enough. B12, you may not be getting enough cobalt in your diet for the body to be able to make B12. So check your B12 every 6 months just to make sure. This is important information that a good raw vegan educator should impart to people. Now, here's the link that I was talking about. If you go to my website /lovefruit, That's where you can find out how to get the free ebooks, where to get all these links to all these articles and blog posts that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. It's all right there. That's the only thing you really need to know. health101.org/lovefruit. Okay. Now, sunshine makes more nutrients in the skin than just vitamin D. There's about like half a dozen other ones. Time does not permit me to go into them now. I do have an article on them which talks about what they are and how they really only can come from sunshine. They're not in food. You can't get them in supplements. Now, D you can get as a supplement, of course. But if you go get tested and you're low in D, well, if you're low in D, you're automatically low in those other half dozen nutrients. But if you only take a D supplement, which only contains D, you're leaving those other very important, equally important nutrients behind. So it's very important to know that if you can't get strong enough sunshine all year round, better than taking a D supplement to keep your D up, to get a phototherapy device. It's just a fancy light box that mimics the UVB rays of the sun, the wavelengths that make all those nutrients in your skin. So that's very important. And
I'm sorry, are those other nutrients listed on your site?
Oh, yeah. If you go to here, my site / the letter D as in Don, that's my article on vitamin D, and it'll tell you what those nutrients are, and it'll really drive home the importance of the point of getting enough sunshine or its equivalent all year round. Now, some people have no problem doing that, people who live closer to the equator, but people who live in New York and upwards in Canada, they're not going to be able to do it all year round. A lot of people in Europe not going to be able to do that all year round. So it's important to get a phototherapy device which makes D and all the rest of those nutrients, and it really does make a big difference regarding your health.
And you have recommendations of the type of phototherapy device to get on your site.
Oh,
perfect.
In that article, sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Now, there are different raw vegan diets. I've counted about 7. There's ones with too much fat, usually the gourmet raw vegan diet. There's ones that actually you end up getting too little fat because they say, no, it's a low-fat diet. Well, I don't like the term low-fat diet because what is low? It really doesn't really mean anything, and some people end up going too low. So too high and too low are both not good. There's a raw vegan diet that includes harmful foods. There's ones that have less than 100%, that are less than 100% raw. And it's amazing how even if you still have some cooked food in your diet, how it can keep certain defense mechanisms in place in your gut, for example, which hampers the absorption of nutrients. So that's why when people go from 50-50 cooked raw to 60-40 raw cooked to 70-30 raw cooked to 80-20 raw cooked, 90-10 raw cooked, they get, about the same amount of improvement with each 10% jump. But when they go from 90-10 to 100%, it's like 1,000,000,000% improvement in their health. Now, why is that? It's because the body then can let go of all those defense mechanisms because you were still taking in certain cooked foods, which cooked foods can cause autoimmune reactions. And if there's any grain products in there, that they kind of scratch up the gut a little bit, and that's not good. So the gut has to protect itself. So that's the advantage of 100%. So if you want to be a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 as far as your health is concerned, you'd want to eat the way we ate originally, and that's no damaged food, no cooked food. Then there's a raw vegan diet that is they give no attention to food miscombinations. They list out all the different foods that are great for us to eat, but they don't talk about food miscombining. And I don't call it food combining, I call it food miscombining, because food combining sounds like, you need to combine certain things in order to get, no, that's the best meal is a meal of just one thing. It's called a mono meal. It's the way all other animal species that live in the wild eat. All the other animal species that eat multiple things, like we eat multiple things, they never gather them up and make a meal out of them. They're just eating a meal of this, or a meal of that, or a meal of that, or a meal of that. It's the easiest on the digestion, and I'm going to show you how that impacts you in a moment. There's raw vegan diets where there's no worries regarding nutrition. There's a popular raw vegan educator who says, as long as you're eating all raw fruits and vegetables, you don't have to be concerned about nutrition. Well, that's just very wrong. That's right out. It's wrong. It's been proven to be wrong. Yet he and the people who follow him, keep saying it, and it's just not correct. There's raw vegan educators who just talk about diet and nutrition, but they don't make any mention of the other basics of health. So if you want to be as healthy as you can possibly be, yeah, diet is the most complex one to look into, but you got to look at all the other equally important aspects. You could be eating the perfect diet and getting exactly the right amount of calories and exactly the right amount of nutrition, enough of all the nutrients, food provided, non-food provided. But if you're not getting enough deep sleep, if you're not getting enough physical activity, and a few other things, it's impossible to be as healthy as you're capable of being. That's why it's important to look at health very holistically. Diet, exercise, sleep, hydration, sunshine, stress avoidance, all those things. So the basics of health, very important. And the healthiest of the raw vegan diets, well, that's one of the 7 raw vegan diets. Because if you have 7 raw vegan diets, odds are they're going to give you different outcomes. And one's going to be the healthiest and one's going to be the least healthiest. So once I figured that out, I said, all right, I want to know what the healthiest one is. Let me figure that one out. And that's the one I'm going to teach. All right, so there are many different raw vegan diets, and you can learn about them in my Facebook group that I moderate. It's the Ultimate Raw Vegan Fruitarian Healing Group, and it's on Facebook. And the link to it is right there on the Love Fruit page. So it'll give you the link. You can go right to it. You can join up and ask questions or just search it. It's got, I think, right now about 1,500 members, or is it 3,000 members? I don't know. It got very popular very quickly. Okay, so now how about this one? Eating fruit doesn't automatically mean that the fruits we eat will provide enough of all. And this is basically because of how fruits are grown today. But let me just show you what happens if you don't get enough of all the nutrients that the body requires. And by the way, the definition of the word enough is more than you need. So think about that. Wait a second. Enough is more than you need? Yeah, because it's impossible to eat in such a way where you get exactly the right amount of calcium you need for the day or the week. You can't. You're either going to get more than you need or less than you need. Which would your body pick? More than you need. So it wants you to get a little bit more than you need of all the nutrients that it requires, guaranteeing it gets enough. So that's my definition of enough, which is a little bit more than you actually need. What does the body do with the excess? It either stores it or you excrete it. But what you don't want is to not get, to get less than you need. That's not good. All right, so if you do get less nutrients, look what happens. Your body's going to want more food. You ever see obese people? They're honestly hungry. I'm not talking about it for emotional reasons. They're physiologically hungry and they want to eat more, but they got plenty of calories stored on them. What are they hungry for? They're hungry for the nutrition they're not getting enough of. So the body says, hey, got plenty of calories, but I don't have enough of all these different nutrients. Keep eating, keep eating, keep eating. So they do. They eat more food, which requires what? More digestion. Digestion is a very energy-intensive process. You only have a certain amount of nervous system energy in a day, and you go to sleep, and that's why we sleep. And in deep sleep, you get a really good recharge of that nervous system energy. So the less digestion you need, or the easier your digestion is, the better it is for you. So if you need more digestion, now you need more sleep. And what does more sleep mean? Less awake time. And what does less awake time mean? Less fun. Right? You can really only have fun when you're awake unless your dreams are really good. But the other thing more digestion means is there's less healing going on, because your body can't do healing and digestion at the same time. They're both very energy intensive. So when you eat a meal and your meal has to be digested, your healing is kind of dialed down. So the easier your digestion, the better your healing will be. And the less healing, the higher odds of degenerative disease if you have less healing and you need more healing. And if you have higher odds of degenerative disease, what does that mean? That again goes back to less fun, and you don't want that. Okay, so you can find out more about this concept at the Love Fruit page, which is for this podcast. Now, how healthy do you want to be? Again, as I said before, I ask people this the first thing, and they're like, what a weird question. I want to be very healthy. I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the healthiest that you can be, what do you want? And keep in mind, the higher the number, the lower your odds of getting a diagnosis of something life-threatening later on in life. That there's a correlation there, okay? And there's also causation there too. We can explain why that is, right? So how healthy do you want to be? As healthy as you can possibly be is 10. The least healthiest you can possibly be is 1. And if you're at a 1, you can't even be listening to this podcast right now, basically, because you're probably in hospice at that point. So what do you want to be? You want to be 10, 9, 8, 7, 6? I mean, where do you want to be? So some people will say, oh, I want to be a 10. Usually people who are dealing with an illness, they want 10. there's no one that's dealing with any kind of serious illness ever says, well, I think I'll be an 8 because I don't really want to do what's necessary to be a 10. No, they want 10. And then they say, then when I'm all healed, maybe I'll think about being a 9 or an 8. But okay, so they get to make that choice, but the people need to know about that, because the things you need to do to be a 10 are actually a lot easier there's less options at 10. 10, you have really no options. If you want options when it comes to diet, pick 4. Oh my God, you have so many options at 4. You can eat at all these different fast food restaurants. You can even overeat on cooked food. It's great being a 4, but that comes with consequences. But at a 10, there are no options. You just got to eat what we're designed to eat. Okay, so I talk about this also in an article that I wrote, How Healthy Do You Want to Be? It really gets into this. And it makes people think, and a lot of people have said they voted this one of the best articles I've written, because it made them think. It gave them what they needed to stick to it, because sometimes you choose the healthiest way of living and eating, and it's tough to stick to. But as long as you realize, I'm investing in my future health, that really helps people carry through with it. Okay, do whatever works for you. How many of you have heard this expression?
Yeah.
Okay, so I see hands going up. Okay. No, I really don't. Yeah, do whatever works for you. Well, this expression, this recommendation is certainly great for pain relievers, right? Because how quickly will you know if a pain reliever works for you or not? Within an hour or two, right? If you're in pain and you take a certain pain reliever and you're still in pain 2-3 hours later, it's not working for you. So with pain relievers, you'll get, instant, you'll know instantly. But what about a diet and lifestyle? Well, just do whatever works for you. Well, what's the definition of works? The definition of works when it comes to diet and lifestyle is worked, with ED on the end. But how will you know, or when will you know that it worked? When you're in the last month of your life. However long you live, when you're in the last month of your life, that's generally when you'll know if the way you've been living for all those decades worked or not. If you get up into the late 90s and you're in reasonably good health, you can pretty much be sure that what you did worked. If you get a diagnosis of some terminal disease at age 65, you can be reasonably sure that what you did not work. But the thing is, in that case, you're not going to have a time machine to go back to 2023 to pick something different. So we really have to use our smarts and be very logical about this and really research it if you want to have a diet and lifestyle that's going to work for you throughout your entire life, so you have great future health. So that's why many people say, oh, listen, you're eating celery now, it's helping. Okay, then it's working for you. Well, you don't know if it's going to work for you as a diet and as a lifestyle. So we really got to think about that one. And if you go to my blog, health101.org/blog, just look up and down the table of contents. You're going to see a short blog post I made about do whatever works for you. And it's very important. So I've shared that with a lot of people who've said, well, I just told her to do whatever works for her. I said, yeah, but you got to think about that, because, there's science behind a lot of the decisions that we need to think about. Now, I've said this before, learn as a researcher, not as a student. Students don't tend to question what they're asked. They may ask questions of clarification, but they don't tend to question what a teacher is teaching them like a researcher would. Researchers question everything. It's just a matter of course for a researcher, it's nothing personal. So that's why I say learn as a researcher, so that you question everything. And again, on my blog, I have a whole article about why it's way better to learn as a researcher and not as a student. Because generally, by the way, as a student, you're just taking one person's program. And what if that program has 10% incorrect information? That might cause you not to thrive in the future. I also say take a first things first approach to health. Just first things first. So when someone says, okay, I've got these symptoms and I've read that if I take clove for this and echinacea for that, that's a do this for this and do that for that approach. That's more of a remedial approach. I say first things first. It doesn't matter what list of symptoms you come to me with. Let's see, are you getting enough nutrients in general? Are you getting enough deep sleep in general? Are you getting enough up and down motion to move your lymphatic fluid? We go through the basics first. We tackle them. Then there might be something specific the person has to do. Maybe when they get tested, I test people at the bare minimum for DB12 and iodine. Those three for sure, because they're the most problematic nutrients that I've found in my practice. So if they come back and the vitamin D is low, okay, now they got to get a phototherapy device. So there are some other things to do. You don't necessarily get a phototherapy device right away as a first things first approach. But yeah, just try and think of first things first, like you do for a lot of other things. So here's an article that I wrote that tackles this very subject, and it really gets into it. It makes people think, yes, this is a good idea. First things first. All right, so we're not designed to eat everything in a market's produce section. I'll just give you a quick there's lots of fruits there. But what about, are there any fruits we should not be eating? Well, yeah, nightshade fruits. We're not really designed for nightshades. And there's two nightshade fruits that raw vegans eat, tomatoes and red bell peppers. And I've had great success with dealing with some issues that people are having by just getting nightshade fruits out of their diet. Now people say, wait a second, did Don Bennett just say not to eat tomatoes? Okay, click, turning off, bye, I'm out. Well, look, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just saying, it's a fruit, but we're not designed to eat all fruit. So nightshades are out, and there's actually some issues with cruciferous vegetables. Now, people hear great things about cruciferous vegetables, and there are great attributes for them, but there's also some downsides. So you got to be aware of the upsides and the downsides to something. And my philosophy is, can I get the upsides of that thing from something else that doesn't have that thing's downsides? And if I can, goodbye to that thing, and I go to something else that has none of those downsides. How about the difference between nature growing our food for us and we growing it for us? Well, look, there you go. On your left is where we used to get our food from, and on the right is where we get it from now. Nature is not a for-profit organization. Nature is growing for what? Not for profit, it's growing for nutrition. And some, I'll see animals eating off one particular bush of blueberries, but not the other bushes. And I'm like, I'll go over and taste. Oh yeah, no wonder they're eating from this blueberry bush. These blueberries taste a lot better than the blueberries on those other bushes. So they're sweeter and they probably have more nutrition. So, but that's nature growing. When you start growing things for profit, sometimes things suffer. And with commercial agri-industry growers, they discovered a while ago that the only thing they need to put back in the soil to be able to grow crop after crop after crop after crop after season is NPK, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. That's all they need to put back in the soil. But we need them to put back a whole bunch of other things into the soil. All right, we need more things than just potassium and phosphorus, don't we? Of course, there's dozens of other nutrients. Are they putting them back in? Well, no, why would they? The government's not forcing them to. Consumers aren't asking for it or demanding it. So why should they? It would impact on their profit margins. So they don't. So what do? We have to do workarounds. Unfortunately, there are workarounds for this. So we can still eat fruit. We just have to make sure to use a workaround to be able to get enough of all the nutrients we need that the fruit isn't providing. Did you know some oranges don't provide any vitamin C? How is that possible? That cannot be possible. Oranges are a great source of vitamin C. Well, yes, in the photo on the left. In the photo on the right, if there's not enough zinc in the soil where those orange groves are growing, the plant can't make the vitamin C. The vitamins don't come from the soil. Vitamins the plants make, but they need certain things. They need photons from the sun, they need oxygen and hydrogen from the water, and they need one other thing, minerals, to make all the different vitamins. And specifically for C, it's zinc. And for this, it's that, and for this, it's that. So for C, vitamin C, it's zinc. If the soil is zinc deficient, there'll be hardly any vitamin C in those oranges. This has been shown. So we just got to, we got to make sure that we're getting enough zinc from somewhere, a plant-based source, optimally. So don't get me started on the agri industry. I can go on for hours on that. So let me give you some recommendations. Don't follow one educator, because again, what if that one educator is teaching 90% accurate information, but 10% inaccurate information? That 10% could cause you not to thrive going forward. And I've seen that with some people following certain educators who were teaching same stuff I'm teaching, 90% of it, but 10% they got wrong or left out or something. And the people following them ended up improving their health and then going downhill after a while. So find the conflicting information. Now people say, well, I don't like conflicting information. Talk to a researcher. Researchers love conflicting information. They love finding it because they're trying to get at the truth, regardless of what the truth is. A researcher is trying to find out the truth, the facts. So when they find conflicting information, they go, okay, goody. Now I'm going to deep dive into both of these and see which one is the right one and which one is the wrong one. And if you're following one of those, you want to know if the one you're following is the right one or not. So be happy when you find conflicting information. Don't let it bum you out. So this is why I say multi-source education is best, because it allows you to find the conflicting information. And if one educator is not teaching something, maybe another educator is teaching it. So this is not even having anything to do with conflicting information. This is just trying to get a broader base as possible of the correct information. And be a researcher and not a student. Okay, so if you go to that Love Fruit page on my website, there is suggested reading there. There's my books. There's a book by Ann Osborne, a book by Ellen Livingston. There's not a lot of them. Your shelf would have to have this many books on it. Not a lot to really know everything you really should be doing. These are the 3 books that I've penned. And to everyone watching this podcast, if you go to the Love Fruit page of my website, there's instructions there on how to get a free copy of the ebook version of these books. You just have to say you saw me on Dr. Montgomery's podcast. You got to say that. There's always a catch, isn't there? All right, I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite expressions, and then we can take some questions. What can do you great harm is what you know that just ain't so. Thank you.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Don. This is a very empowering presentation. I like the simplicity of it and the directness of it, and I like a lot of the points that you make. And I know you have this on your site. Could you just, for the sake of the audience, give us a few of the nutrients that are important with vitamin D? And I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is something that I've always wondered. So it's something that I not just simply wondered, but just thought to myself that sunshine and being outdoors in general there are more health benefits than just vitamin D. I just never knew what they were, and so I'm really impressed with the fact that you have that information. What are some nutrients? I know there are a lot, but if there's a top 2 or 3 that come to mind that you can spout off, what are they, nutrients that you know?
Well, there's one that's really important for blood sugar, blood pressure regulation, nitric oxide.
Okay.
So that's what the sunshine will make in your skin. So that's where we're supposed to get that from, because you don't really get that from foods. I have seen a few companies now making it as a supplement, but again, rather than a pill type supplement, if you can get it naturally from sunlight or from the equivalent of sunlight, that's best. There's another one called vitamin D sulfate, D-sulfate. That's not to be confused with vitamin D, it's different. And what researchers now finding out is, as far as the immune system is concerned, D-sulfate is actually more important than D. Now, we've known for a long time D is very important to the immune system, but now we're finding out that D-sulfate is even more important. But that does not come from food, and it does not come from can't come from a supplement. So the only way to get it is from strong enough sunshine, or the equivalent, which is a light box. So let's see, the cholesterol sulfate is another one. And you might think, well, why do we, cholesterol bad, we don't want cholesterol. We stop eating animal products so that we don't get, no, your body needs cholesterol. It'll make what it needs, but guess what? In order to make what it needs cholesterol sulfate that comes from sunshine. Again, not from food. And there's like three other ones, but you can read it in my vitamin D article.
Sure, that's great. And then along the same line of discussion, the phototherapeutic light. So let's say, for instance, we live in the North Pole. We can't get out into the sun. How many hours or minutes a day, if I were prescribing this for a patient, let's say I see a patient have a vitamin D level of 4 and, they can't get outdoors or whatever. What's the general recommendation in terms of minutes or hours in front of this phototherapeutic light that they'll need?
It would depend on a couple of factors. One is which light, because all lights have different power outputs. There's the ones that are 6 foot tall. Well, that would be a little less than the one that's 3 foot tall. The person's skin tone plays a big role in it. Okay. Somebody very light toned skin will need less than someone with very dark toned skin. There's that. The level, of course, also. It depends how low they are. And it's amazing, Dr. Montgomery, because I counsel people from all around the world, because I can do it through email. And there are the ranges, the reference ranges for vitamin D from all around the world are so different. I mean, forget about the fact that the units of measurement are different. In the United States, it's nanograms per milliliter. In Europe, it's nanomoles per liter. But let's just say they're all the same units of measure. Still, the bottom of the reference ranges. In the United States, I see 30. That's the usual one I see from labs. But then I've also seen 20, and I've seen 15 as the bottom of the okay range. That's insane. That is just insane. The actual bottom of the optimal range starts at 50. So if you have somebody testing at 35 nanograms per milliliter, the lab says, fine, no red flags, they're good. But no, that's not optimal. Optimal starts at 50, so 50 to 80. So 65 would be the sweet spot. So I try and tell people, keep doing this until you can get it up to 65. Now here's an interesting conundrum. Is a suntan a tan? Is it good for you? Trick question.
Yeah, it's typically when people are tan, that's the sign they've been in the sun for an adequate period of time. But it could be an adverse reaction of the skin to the sun, especially if you get burned.
Well, yeah. Well, burns are right out. I'm hoping everybody listening today realizes that sunburns are bad. Avoid at all costs. But people say, "Oh, he's got such a rich, deep, healthy tan." A tan is a protective mechanism that the body causes when you're getting a little bit too much of those UVA rays, those damaging rays. It'll start darkening the skin. So when people test very low in D and they say, okay, I'm going to go out in the sun now. I'm going to lie horizontal with no clothes on. I don't care what the neighbors say. And I'm going to start and I'm going to get a tan. Well, the tan protects the body from UVA, but it also protects the body from UVB. So it decreases the amount of UVA and UVB that can come into the skin. And UVB is what makes the nutrients. UVA does the damage. UVB makes the nutrients. So I tell people, listen, if you're going to get a phototherapy device, I would recommend you use that exclusively because it will not tan you, because it doesn't do UVA rays. It just does the UVB rays, which make the nutrients. So this may sound counterintuitive, but you want to stay out of the sun for now until you get your dangerously low vitamin D levels and the low levels of all those other nutrients up at least into the optimal range. Then if you want to go outside and get a tan, you can do that. But a tan is a bad thing when you're using a phototherapy device because it reduces the amount of nutrients that the light from the device will actually make in the skin. Isn't this fascinating?
It's amazing. And I'm going to throw one other question and open the floor because I know our audience have a lot of questions. But just back to the phototherapy light, the range, I know it varies from skin tone, but what's the general range that you recommend? I mean, the ballpark, an hour?
Oh, no. The one thing about phototherapy devices, since they're going to make a piece of technology, they can make it to do it therapeutically. So this is the difference between a therapeutic amount of UVB and the amount you'd get from the sun. So you'd have to stay out in the sunshine a lot longer to get the same amount of UVB as you would from a phototherapy device. It's a therapeutic device. So the one I recommend that most people, 95% of people get, it's, let's see. Oh boy.
Okay, is that a
There it,
3 foot?
there it is.
Okay, the Spurdy vitamin
Yep.
D.
Spurdy. But I have a page. Oops. Oh, I'd never go anywhere without my Spurdy. No, I have a page on my website. It's actually health101.org/Spurdy with a lowercase s. And that tells you the link to where you can get it. It's not an affiliate link. I don't make any money from these things. But it tells you how far away you should stand, where you should position it height-wise, because you really only need to do your torso. So, you do, if you're just starting out and you have pale skin, you do 2 minutes on your front, turn around, do 2 minutes on your back once a day, and you build up to 5 minutes a day. It has a timer on it. And when the timer reaches whatever you set it for, it goes ding, and that's how you know you've gotten your 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. Some people with very dark tone skin, well, they need to use it. They need to start at 5 minutes, and they may need to do this twice a day, about 12 hours apart approximately, because they have such dark tone skin. But yeah, and of course, before using it, anyone who's thinking of, they're on Amazon right now looking for it, or they're going to Spurdy.com to order one. Before you start using it, it's so important, and I'm sure Dr. Montgomery will agree with me on this, is to do a baseline vitamin D test so you can see where you're starting. So once you know where you're starting, now you can know if how you're using it, and don't test any less than 3 months, because vitamin D is very slow to increase. So you start using it. 3 months later, test again with the same lab, and then now you can compare apples to apples and see if you're using it enough. But D takes a long time to rise up, and one of the reasons it takes a long time is demand. People say, well, why is my iodine level not increasing quickly? Because your body's demand for iodine, every cell has an iodine receptor on it. So you were very low. You had a deficiency of iodine because you don't use iodized table salt. You don't eat any fresh seaweeds. So you haven't been getting any iodine for years and years. So no wonder you have an iodine deficiency. But your body's demand for it is super high. It can only process a certain amount. So it could take you a year and a half at a therapeutic amount to get up to the level that whole body tissue sufficiency of iodine. And vitamin D.
What would be a therapeutic amount, Don?
I don't like to give out amounts when it comes to iodine. I don't mind doing it with B12 because you really can't harm yourself with B12. So I can say a therapeutic amount is 5,000 micrograms. A normal daily maintenance amount is 1,000 micrograms for B12. If you take too much, you're not going to harm yourself. And there's no B12 cofactor nutrients that you must make sure you're okay in order to take B12. So B12 is very safe, and I give out that information, no problem. Iodine is different. People have landed themselves in the hospital by trying to do it as a DIY project, because you have to be selenium sufficient. You have to have a proper selenium level in your body before you start taking any iodine, or you get too much unmanaged hydrogen peroxide, and that puts you in the hospital, and that's no good. But an amount, generally, this is people not dealing with cancer. This is just people dealing with an iodine deficiency. You would work your way up to about 50 milligrams a day. Now, people say 50 milligrams. Wow, that's a lot. Medical professionals who know nothing about iodine, by the way, will say, well, that's quite a lot of iodine. I'll share this with you. This is likely going to tell me if you resonate with this, Dr. Montgomery. I deal with a lot of people who are under the care of an endocrinologist for their thyroid, okay? So what do you get tested when you get your thyroid tested? You get TSH, T3, T4. Now, T3 and T4 are two hormones. What does the 3 and 4 in T3 and T4 represent? I have the people who work with me ask their endocrinologist, well, what's the 3 and the 4? And they'll get answers like, well, it just means that these are two different hormones. That's how we designate them. Yeah, but what is the 3? 3 of what? And so many of them don't know because they're not taught. It's atoms of iodine, showing you how important iodine is to the thyroid. And of all the organs in the body, the thyroid is the one that requires the most iodine. Actually, iodide, not iodine. breast tissue requires iodine, thyroid requires iodide. There's two forms of the same thing, basically. It's just two different forms. So if endocrinologists don't know, if they knew the importance, if they knew that 3 and 4 stood for atoms of iodine, they would include iodine testing as part of the thyroid function panel, wouldn't they? So it'd be TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, maybe the antibodies, and iodine, the 2 iodine tests, right? They put that right in there. But they're not there because there's a certain industry out there that does not want the population getting healthy. And if the population got more vitamin D and more iodine, they'd be getting so healthy, it would be horrible for this particular industry. And sadly, as ill health goes up, their profits go up. So they want ill health going up. And I'm talking about the pinheads in 3-piece suits all the way up there on the top who are sociopaths. I'm not talking about the doctors and nurses now. But there are a lot of people in the pharmaceutical industry, same thing. So they don't want people finding out about the importance of sufficient D and iodine.
What's your favorite iodine test? What's your favorite iodine test?
Well, it's a urine test. It's 2 tests. They're both urine tests. You can do them at home. There's a kit you can get, but I just advise that you do it under the guidance of an iodine literate practitioner. And there are some naturopaths out there who know the importance of having sufficient iodine, but they don't know about they only do 1 test. Or they do the skin patch test, which is totally worthless. Or they don't know about the importance of taking selenium before you start the iodine protocol. It's actually part of the iodine protocol, but you start taking selenium before taking the iodine because it's very important to do. So they don't know, they weren't trained. There's nobody training these people. All right? It's not like, the medical profession has standards of practice, which is great. Non-medical alternative,
it's not great.
It's the Wild West out here, isn't it, right? I wish more people would learn the right way to do an iodine protocol and testing, both tests. It's a spot test.
Book?
No, I don't put it in my book because, again, it's not something that you can just read an article or a book. I tried to write an article. I wrote an article about how to assess and correct your D level, your B12 level. I tried to write one for iodine. I couldn't because it's just so complicated. So you need to work with somebody. I do it. There's a lot of other people who do it. It can be done over emails. It doesn't have to be done in person or the telephone. But it's just there's so many ways to go wrong and harm yourself by doing it wrong. So
Can I ask you a question? Can you
I'll be
get
reaching out to you.
iodine from sea vegetables?
yes. Now, the reason why women in Japan have the lowest rates of breast cancer in the entire world is they're eating lots of fresh seaweeds, freshly caught seaweeds, still wet, never dried. And those fresh seaweeds will contain sufficient amounts of iodine. And they've been eating it their whole lives, okay? That they haven't gone for decades without eating it and then they started eating it. It's just part of their diet. Like hamburgers are part of our diet. Not our diet, but you know what I mean. So they get enough, they've been getting enough iodine and that iodine, the body can convert back and forth between iodine and iodide. So that's why they have such low rates of breast cancer. And by the way, women who have breast cancer, if they're not taking like 200 milligrams of iodine, under the care of an iodine literate practitioner, they're nuts because it really does help. Because what gland is so important for dealing with cancer? It's the thymus gland, right? The thymus gland makes what? T killer cells. For the thymus gland to be operating properly, it needs enough iodine. If it ain't getting it, it's not making enough T killer cells and cancer just goes unchecked. So again, these facts that the pharmaceutical industry, did I say that? Well, they don't want anyone to know about this kind of stuff. So
And can we get the seaweed, the non-dried seaweed that, because I take Ioderol, but can we get the non-dried seaweed? Do most of us have access to that?
No, people have looked around and they try to get it. It's in a package. It needs to be fresh. It really needs to be fresh caught. Most people are telling me, no, I'm doing dulse, I'm doing kelp. I'm like, is it dried? They say yes. Well, you know why? Remember the blue bottle, the blue containers of Morton salt with the white top and the metal spout on it? Yep. What did it say on the container? Keep in a cool, dry place with the spout closed. Because if you leave it out where it's warm and you leave the spout open, the iodine sublimates. It goes from a solid to a gas. It doesn't. There's no intermediate liquid state. It just sublimates right out, and you wave goodbye to it. So when you dry seaweeds, wave goodbye to the iodine because it just sublimates away. So that's why you're not going to get iodine. Now, wait a second. How come the package of dried seaweed says it's got X amount of iodine in it? How can that be then? Well, it had it before they dried it. That's the pre-drying amount. How do they get away with this? Just blows my mind. But when you test people who've been taking, I said, oh, you've been taking this dried dulcin kelp for a long time, and I'm in that camp. I did the same thing once I started looking into iodine, and then I tested myself after a few years, and I'm sure I'm not going to have a deficiency because I've been adding dulcin kelp to my salads, and no, I had a deficiency. The iodine loading test, which is given as a percentage, should be above 90. So 90% of what you took as the pill that comes with the test should be urinated away. I was at 40%. So my body was hanging on to so much iodine from that test pill of iodine that I took that it means I had an iodine deficiency. So then I realized, well, how? I thought dulcin kelp, oh, the fresh form of it will have enough, a daily maintenance amount. But now that I have, in other words, would it help for me to go move to Japan and start eating the fresh seaweed? No, I already have an iodine deficiency. Fresh seaweed isn't going to tackle an iodine deficiency any more than getting a normal amount of vitamin D is going to deal with a super low vitamin D level. Or what about if you have very, very low B12? You can't just say, all right, I'll add some cobalt into my diet. Now my body can make B12. It's not going to make enough to give you a therapeutic amount to get that level up to normal. Once you get these levels to normal, then you can do normal things. That's the way I look at it.
Fascinating. Jackie, go ahead and open the floor
Lillian
for
has
questions.
a question about iodine. Lillian?
Okay, so maybe you can help me because I have been struggling with this for 30 years and you might have the answer for me when nobody else did. I have Graves' disease. So I've been on medication for it and I've had periods where it's gone into remission and then I've had periods where it's just out of control. So should I be eating less iodine? Because my issue is I make too much thyroid hormone when things are out of whack. So if I take the iodine away in my diet, then theoretically I'm thinking I can't make thyroid hormone. Is that true?
Well, when you say you're consuming iodine in your diet now, how are you getting it? Where are you getting it from?
I don't add table salt to my food, but if I eat out, then of course, things get salted in restaurants.
The salt in restaurants, even if it started out as iodized table salt, the salt shaker is sitting there on the table. It's got the holes in the top, so the iodine just kind of sublimates out. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that it had a normal amount of iodine in there that they put in there when medical science discovered that we were all iodine deficient and people walking around with these big goiters 100 years ago, right? So they said, what's causing it? Figure it out, and then put something in something. So they figured out it was iodine. So they said, all right, let's start putting iodine in something that it binds well with. Well, everyone uses table salt. Let's put it in table salt. Well, that was great. And it took care of the goiter epidemic. But then what happened, 10, 15 years ago, people stopped using iodized table salt. Well, now where are they getting their iodine from? So, but to your point about Graves' disease, thyroids, when they go wrong, when they malfunction in one of two ways. They either start making not enough of the thyroid hormones, which is hypothyroidism, or they, in rarer cases, they go hyperthyroid and they start making too much. And that's when people start, medical science will start irradiating the thyroid or removing it or whatever. But both those things, the thyroid going wrong, can be caused by it not getting enough of all the nutrients it requires, and the main one is iodine. So I've had people who've had Graves' disease, but not because of a hot nodule. See, did you ever get checked?
I don't have a hot nodule either.
Oh,
it's autoimmune.
Good. Okay. So if you had a hot nodule, then you can't take iodine, because that'd be like pouring gasoline on a fire and you go into thyroid storm and you risk death. So your it's great that you don't have a hot nodule. So if your thyroid is malfunctioning in a hyper manner, and not because of a hot nodule, most of the people who take iodine properly, making sure they have enough selenium and the other iodine cofactor nutrients, well, their Graves' disease go away. Hypo is much more prevalent, and a lot of people, have hypothyroidism and they're cold all the time and, low energy, and they start taking iodine properly, and their hypothyroidism goes away. But it works the same thing for Graves' disease. Now, unfortunately, medical doctors will say, no, you can't take iodine for Graves' disease. That's the worst thing you want to do. It's only bad if the hyperthyroidism is caused by a hot nodule. You say you don't have one, that's great. If I was counseling with you, I'd say, okay, I believe you. However, here's what to watch out for, that just in case you do and they missed it or something like that. I'd give you the list of symptoms, and if you start getting any of these, you don't want to go into thyroid storm, so you'd stop taking the iodine instantly. But yeah, so you don't have your thyroid removed or
No, I've just been on medication for 30 years.
Okay, well, it's probably unnecessary, but of course, someone that works for the pharmaceutical industry wouldn't say that. They would say it's obviously necessary.
Right.
But I go for the natural ways first. Give your thyroid enough of all that it requires, and then see if over time you regain functionality. Now, it's not like B12. If your hand starts shaking and you test for B12 and you're super low and you take some, the shaking will stop within a day or two, and you'll have a normal B12 level in under a week. But things like D and iodine takes a long time, just because of supply and demand. You can't just take thousands of milligrams of iodine. Your body you'd be urinating most of it away and wasting money. So you can only your body can only utilize and process so much of it. And then you got the demand factor, as I talked about earlier. Every cell in your body requires iodine. When people go for those fMRIs where they give the person iodine and they want to see where the tumors are, because the tumors will suck up the iodine, right, and light up. I'm always interested in watching everything else that's lighting up, the healthy, normal tissue. There's a portion in the brain that lights up. Imagine that. One portion in the brain lights up more than the rest of the brain when you're given that liquid radioactive iodine. That's amazing to me. So there's a portion of the brain that requires more iodine than the rest of the brain. And it's all the same organ. The skin gets a very soft glow because all the cells, every cell you have has an iodine receptor. It's like the best kept secret. And I won't go into why. I did write an article about how medical doctors used to prescribe iodine pills. My grandfather has a box of old, you can't take them anymore. They're long since outdated, but it's a box of iodine pills that he got at a pharmacy. Because 100 years ago, medical doctors prescribed iodine. But because iodine is bad for the sales of thyroid medications like you're taking, oh no, they had to do away with that. They had to do away with, because you can't patent iodine. You can patent the medication that you're taking, but you can't patent iodine because it's a natural nutrient. So there's a lot of stuff going on there today that we all really need to know about to be the healthiest we can be. Because you want to take it not just for your thyroid, but for what? Your thymus gland, your skin, that portion of the brain, every other part of your body needs it. So it's one of the most important, it's one of the best things you can do. That with D and B12 are the three most problematic ones that most people, including raw vegans, are low in, D, B12, and iodine. Because, no one taught them to now be careful. You've got to get enough sunshine. And what if you don't live where? And with B12, if there's not enough cobalt in your diet, your body won't make B12, which is where we're supposed to get our B12 from. We're supposed to make it ourselves. And iodine is supposed to come from this and this, but we don't get it anymore. And the demand for it is higher today because of all the stress and the chemicals we breathe in and all this other stuff. So, yeah, a lot to know. But fortunately, there are people like myself who know it.
So that actually makes me wonder about chronometer. So many people use it as a guide to tell them about whether or not they're getting enough nutrition. And if you're saying that our food is not as nutritious as it used to be, how accurate is a chronometer?
That is a great question. If I could hug you right now, I would, because that is I love great questions. I wrote a whole article about the very thing you just asked, and it goes into great detail about why you should not rely on chronometer for if you're getting enough nutrition. Chronometer is great for looking at the percentage of fat and carbs and protein. It's great for that. You put in what you eat, for the week, and it'll tell you what percentage of your diet is fat, what's protein, what's carbohydrates. That's useful information. But the information about nutrition, well, let me ask you this. Have you used chronometer?
Yeah, occasionally I've used it.
Okay. When you use it, do you have that little box that plugs into the USB port of your computer that you put samples of the food that you're eating into the box so chronometer can know the value of it?
No, that's why it's a guess.
Right. The numbers that it's based on are ridiculous. If you look at the range of, pick any nutrient you want, iron, pick iron. The range of iron in foods that are supposed to be good sources of iron vary from almost nothing to a goodly amount. So what is chronometer picking on that range? It's ridiculous. That's why I say, unless you can spend the thousands of dollars doing SpectraCell testing, which I'm not even, there's better uses of your money, first of all. You can assume certain things, and this is what we can do today. We can assume that we're not getting enough of all the nutrients that we need from the foods that we're eating, except for potassium and phosphorus, right? There's no raw vegan walking around with a potassium or phosphorus deficiency because the growers have to put that back in the soil that our fruits are grown in. So you don't have to worry about those two. But what about the other couple of dozen? Those you got to think about. And there's workarounds for it. And some of them, like people who have blood sugar regulation issues, they're probably very low in chromium and vanadium. Okay, so yes, start putting in some nutritional adjuncts and that complement the diet. There's some green powders that I like that are really, really good because the soil that those grasses, that those green powders are made out of, they juice the grass. Those soils are good soils. They're putting compost and everything into those soils, unlike the agri-industry growers. You should do that. But if you're very low in chromium and vanadium and you have blood sugar regulatory issues, you may need to take a pill type chromium and vanadium for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, just to give it a boost, to get it up there. And then the natural, the food provided, I use the terms pre-plant and post-plant form of the nutrient. The pre-plant form of the nutrient is the form of the mineral that's in the soil. The post-plant form of the nutrient is the form of that same mineral after the plant has gotten through doing its thing, bringing in all the sunlight and the water and the stuff and doing its, whatever it does, the photosynthesis. That's the post-plant version. The post-plant version of minerals like cobalt or chromium or vanadium are 95% bioavailable by the body. That's good. The pre-plant, like if you were to eat dirt, if you were to eat soil, nice rich soil, it's only about 5%. So when you use those pill-type nutrient supplements, it's only 5%. That's why the numbers have to be so high. Because people say, well, wait a minute, why are you telling me, look at this green powder. It only has this much of cobalt in it. But look at the cobalt. Yeah, because 95% bioavailable, 5% bioavailable. That's why you need so much more in a pill type. So that once you start realizing these things, in other words, if I had $1 for every aha moment I've experienced over the last 50 years, I'd be a billionaire today.
You said that one of the essential nutrients is sodium.
Mm-hmm.
What does low sodium feel like, and can we not get enough sodium? And what does that feel like? What does that look like? How do we make sure that we're getting enough?
Well, you can assume
So many of us are on low sodium diets now. So
Well, yeah, because they were supposedly eating too much sodium. All right. So in other words, there was this thing where salt was the villain, right? Salt was raising blood pressure and all this. And so low salt, low sodium foods were created, and then the low sodium craze. And then now it turns out, when we look in hindsight, it really wasn't the salt that was raising blood sugar levels, blood pressure levels. So people went too far in the other direction, and they avoided anything with sodium in it. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, what are the symptoms? Dr. Montgomery, help me out here. The symptoms of too low a sodium level.
Well, I mean,
it's an electrolyte. So I think you start getting a little
Yeah,
hard
it's,
to
it's
think.
mental status. It's
Yeah.
older people will become basically delirious, the consciousness. We've had people who come in nearly comatose. Now it depends on how fast it goes down.
Right,
And
right.
of course, if you correct it too fast, there's a condition called central pontine myeloneurolysis, which is a problem too. You can have seizures and things like that with that. So you if it comes down slowly, I've had people come in with sodiums of 118 and they're fairly coherent because it just come down very slowly. And so we just sort of gradually improve it. But the low sodium issue is one that I've always questioned because most forms of sodium that the general public gets is not a natural salt. It's an adulterated salt. They take, say, a natural salt and boil it to 2,000 degrees, and then they have to they have to bleach it and add anti-caking, talcum, substance. So it's really a chemicalized agent that's different than, say, a natural sea salt that's sun dried. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? That part of the
Well, yeah,
confusion?
if you need sodium, like I said before, you don't want the pre-plant form of sodium, which is the form of sodium in the soil, because it's only 5% bioavailable. And and as salt, you're getting a bunch of other nonsense in with it. So you want the post-plant form of sodium. In other words, you want to get one of those green powders, which are made from, let's say, barley grass, for example. And the barley grass is growing in great soil that's very nutritious, has a good amount of sodium in the soil. And then that's taken into the plant, and then it's juiced and made into a powder, and then you consume that in a smoothie or in a mush. That's the form of sodium you want because it's 95% bioavailable. So that's why you don't need as much of it. In other words, the amount that's going to be in that natural food. And when you try these green powders, not all of them, just there are good green powders and garbage green powders. But when you try the good one, and you'll taste it's savory. It's like tomatoes used to taste to me when I grew them in my yard because it's got a goodly amount of sodium. And sodium is so important. And how do you know? You literally have taste buds on your tongue coded for sodium. So when you're seeking out food in the wild, yes, you'll taste for sweet and you'll taste for sodium. So you'll want the sweetest fruits from the sweetest bushes or trees, but you'll also want the ones that have the salty taste to them. And you want the saltiest, and that's why we can code for salt on our tongue because of how important sodium is. And then what do runners do? Runners, they're running and sweating, and they're drinking water, and they're diluting their electrolytes, including sodium, so their sodium levels drop. And I've known runners who have died from hyponatremia because their sodium levels just got diluted and dropped so far so fast. So that's just nuts to do something where it's forcing you to sweat so much so quickly.
Wow, impressive. So the barley grass and other green powders, I'm looking at your links here, and I see some things on here, so I'll look that up as well.
Yeah, if you go to the Love Fruit page that I've showed in my presentation, my website /Love Fruit, all the way on the bottom, you'll see the one green powder that I recommend over all of them. And I've been using it in my practice for about 15 years now, and with myself and a lot of people, and it helps so many people. And why? It's not, people call it a miracle. It's not a miracle. It's just a food that happens to be grown. It comes from really good, nutritious soil. So someone said to me, well, why do the farmers, why is their soil, what do they have some secret formula for their soil, but the agri-industry growers don't know how to do that? No, it's not a question of not knowing. It's a question of profit. The agri-industry growers don't want to put sodium back in the soil because it's not necessary for the plants to grow. Only potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen are necessary to grow those plants. But those plants won't be very nutritious. But the people growing the grass that they're going to make into a supplement, a nutritional supplement, they better be putting good stuff in their soil, because if I take their supplement, and I have done this, and I take it to a lab, that powder, and I say, I want you to test for this nutrient, this nutrient, this nutrient. I give them 24 nutrients to test for, one of them being sodium. And if it comes back and it differs from what they say on the label is in it, they're in big trouble. Obviously, I won't recommend it anymore, and they go out of business like that. So if you're growing a food specifically as a nutritional supplement, yeah, you take really good care of your soils. But if you're growing it just to make lettuce to put inside of a hamburger, you don't care what's in it as far as the grower's concerned.
Wow, wow. And this Daily Green Boost, I'm looking at the powder, so you can just mix it with water and drink it, or just add it to a
Well,
smoothie, or
yeah, I wouldn't mix it with water because you got to think about it.
okay.
The one liquid we're designed to drink is water. Water
Uh-huh.
has no nutrients in it. I mean, it has minerals
Okay.
in it, but they're the pre-plant form of nutrients. So
Yep.
when you drink water, what does the body do? It kind of distills it to make it completely empty so that water can become part of blood and become part of lymph. And blood and lymph carry things around the body. So the water, which is a major component of blood and lymph, have to become part of those things empty, completely empty. Okay? So the body filters out all those minerals and you just poop out the minerals because they're the inorganic form of the minerals. And they're not very bioavailable, only 5%. And
Gotcha.
supposedly you're eating a good diet. So when you drink water, it flies right through the small intestines. And as a
Uh-huh.
lot of us know, the small intestines is where the bulk of nutrition is pulled into the body. So when you eat a solid food meal, that door between the small intestines and the large intestines closes. So the solid food meal is held up in the small intestines to have a lot of face time, to give it time enough for the nutrients to be pulled through osmosis into. So if you put some good nutrition, some kick butt nutrition into water and drink it, it just flies right through because the body
Ah,
is sensing water. It doesn't know that you did this. In nature, you could never have water chock full of these nutrients. So that's why I recommend to use Daily Green Boost always with a solid food meal. So you make it as part of a thick smoothie, or if you don't have a blender, you can just make a mush. I call it a mush or a mash. Take a big bowl, put in some ripe bananas, put the green powder in, and mash it all up and just eat it. And it's important to chew each mouthful. And then you've eaten a solid food meal. Well, you've eaten a meal of highly nutritious bananas. That's what you've done.
wow, wow. Does it have a pretty bitter taste for people who don't like greens, or is it pretty?
No, if you go to my Daily Green Boost page, you'll see a picture of a little kid. He's like 5, 6 years old. Elvis is his name. He loves his Daily Green Boost. When his mom is going to make a smoothie for him, he goes, "Don't forget the green. Don't forget the green," because he loves it. Kids
He's
can
got it all over his face. I see it.
Oh, kids, I mean, if you just lick your finger and stick it in there and then lick, you're like, wow, this is savory and I can tell some sweetness. You don't want it bitter. Bitter is bad. Bitter is bad. That's how you remember. B is B. Bitter is bad. We can taste bitter things. We have those taste buds on our tongue coated because, in general, bitter things are bad for the body. A lot of them are poisonous. So if we eat it, we spit it right out. We're not supposed to like bitter. But I know
Oh,
people who love bitter. And I'm like, what? What is wrong with your taste buds? What is wrong with you? Yeah, bitter is bad. So anything like that's why I will eat romaine lettuce, and I've had nice sweet romaine lettuce grown in a garden. But arugula, you couldn't pay me. Offer me 45 grand because I want to buy a Tesla. So offer me 45 grand to eat arugula. I won't do it.
oh, wow. I like arugula actually, but it's but I understand your point. That's good. That's good to hear. So this is great news that we shouldn't force ourselves to consume bitter foods.
Right. In other words, you want to eat stuff that you love that loves you back. And there are people who love arugula, but believe me, arugula does not love them back.
Like you
Wow.
said, nightshades, right? I
And
recently
nightshades
gave up
another one.
nightshades because they do not love me back.
Right. And that, some people are very sensitive to nightshades, so they'll know right away. But the
Yeah.
people who aren't hypersensitive to nightshades, they'll say, well, I can eat them. Same thing with gluten, right? I'm not gluten intolerant. I can eat things with gluten because they don't affect me. No, they don't affect you acutely, but they're going to affect you over decades. So you're still going to have damage. It's just going to be over decades instead of an instant, sensitivity to them.
Mm.
Aren't I filled with fascinating stuff?
No, this is extremely
Definitely.
fascinating, and this is I'll have to say this has been a wonderful hour and 20 minutes. And I'll definitely be reaching out to you for information on iodine. So I'll sign up for some of your coaching and information because the iodine issue is certainly one that I'll need help with, and certainly in helping my patients. And so and
Oh,
your
thank you.
website is
Thank you
fascinating.
for that. That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's
Hey,
fascinating. So
Jackie,
thank
did you do that?
Hmm?
Did you do that at the bottom of the screen there? Look at that. My name with the blue.
that's her wizardry there.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you.
But thanks again for this. And this is hopefully this is the first of a number of times we bring you on. This has been easy, the most fascinating talk I've had, especially about the raw food. I made a lot of notes here. I generated a number of questions, so I'll be reaching out to you very soon to get your insight and wisdom on a lot of other things, because I think I can gain a lot of information from you that's going to help our patients. So look forward to hearing from me very soon. Thank you very much, Don. This has
Oh,
been
thank you for
very,
having
very-
me.
This is great, great. Well, everybody, thank you very much for attending. And let everyone know this is being recorded. Even those of you are here, I mean, there's a lot of information that he shared with us that I think we should go back and review this. And by all means, do look at the website. There's a lot of great information on that website. I encourage any of you who have any health questions or the like, reach out to Don. There's some coaching classes and things, and I think you can gain a lot of insight. The reason we do grand rounds, we bring in experts like Don, who has a lot of information. I don't pretend to have, 1% of all the knowledge, let alone all of it. And so, I'm smart enough to bring in people who are smarter than I am, who has a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. And I can certainly say this about Don. So look at the website, look at the articles, get the books, and reach out to him for any coaching or questions that you may have. Thank you very much, Don. I really appreciate it. You have
Thank you,
Thanks.
Don.
All right, everybody take care.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Right.